Honorables, members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen, most welcome to the second panel of today. Now we will discuss the role of parliamentarians in defending civic participation to counter the rise of violent extremism and prevent mass atrocities. And I would like to start to say a few words. Generally, we know of the primary driving grievance of individuals who join extremists or violent groups or related governance. Governance structures and political leaders need to be responsive to civic demands in order to address grievances. Without a free and open safe spaces for civil society to share concerns and needs, these demands cannot be considered and responded to adequately. When the government itself is a perpetrator of mass violence and atrocities, it often gives targets to the civil society's organizations. And that's just because the civil society is very important. And I would like to mention the Institute of Economics and Peace, IEP. They do annual give a report, and they have also make a difference between positive peace as well as negative peace. By positive peace, they mean the presence of attitudes, institutions, and structures. And by negative peace, they include things like, they define it as the absence of violence or fear of violence. These are actually in opposition against these others. And IEP have also recognized 8 pillars that you already probably know about, but I will mention them. And these pillars are very, very important for peace, for sustainable peace. The 8 pillars are, first of all, well-functioning government. Second, sound business environment. 3, low levels of corruption. 4, high levels of human capital. 5, free flow of information. 6, good relations with neighbors. 7, equitable distribution of resources. 8, acceptance of the right of others. And I would underline here the importance of a well-functioning government. I say this because we as parliamentarians, we can have and should have impact on the governance, both as legislator, but also in our duties to scrutinize the government. I will also mention the importance of the free flow of information. A society with the freedom of information, it's very important because it means that the citizens have access to information, so they could be updated what goes on in the society. They can make their free choice. They can also take part in the society. That's why it's so important with the free flow of information. And I do also want to underline the importance of a robust civil society. The civil society is one of the pillars. The free society is also a well-functioning government that tolerates opposition voices and are critical when the government moves in the wrong direction. And this is one of the main focus for this panel, to talk about the civil society and the importance of it, and how we as legislators can contribute to the civil society, as well as the good governance. And by this, I would like to give the word to Mr. Adrian Arena, who is Director of the International Human Rights Program at the Oak Foundation. And before that, I do also want to please ask the panelists to keep to 10 minutes each, because we should finish at 1 o'clock, and I would really appreciate if it will be possible for the floor to raise questions and remarks. So please, Mr. Adrian Arena, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is, as Margareta said, my name is Adrian Arena. I am the director of the Human Rights Program at a philanthropy called the Oak Foundation, which is based in Geneva, though I'm based in London. It's a private family foundation that has 6 programs, of which human rights is but one. And we give grants to organizations around the world, in many of the countries which you come from, to support civil society in their aims of improving their society. Margareta, when she made some prefatory comments to this session, she indicated the importance of civic society, civil society, and in particular the role that you can play as legislators to ensure that there is a proper enabling environment for the operation of those groups. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about, through first-hand experience, of what it's like to be, as an international donor, supporting organizations in various parts of the world in an environment which is being increasingly restrictive. And that restrictive environment is really commonly known as shrinking civic space. So I want to tell you, first of all, I want to do 3 things in this brief 10 minutes. I want to tell you what is shrinking civic space. I want to give you some theories as to why that space is shrinking. And thirdly, I want to give you some ideas about what we can do about it. So what is shrinking space? Well, since January 2012, we've had more than 100 laws in 60 countries that have been proposed or enacted by governments aimed at restricting the registration, operation, or funding of non-governmental organizations. These restrictions impact on a wide range of organizations, from human rights activists, environmental activists, trade unionists, journalists, anti-corruption watchdogs, equality advocates, development organizations, community and religious groups, bloggers, and academics. This legislation usually applies to all non-profit organizations, though I must say that the particular targets appear to have been most acutely human rights and environmental activists. Their intent is pretty simple. It's to disrupt, to paralyze, to complicate the day-to-day work of rights advocates. Activists are forced to divert limited time and resources towards navigating restrictions and responding to administrative and judicial harassment. Longer term, this weakens the infrastructure of civil society. The nature of the restrictions vary, but generally they include the following, and as an international donor, I feel very much familiar with all of these. One, it's the increased scrutiny of NGO activities and sources of funding, in particular prohibitions on foreign funding, advance government approval for the receipt of funding, a whole lot of burdensome procedural requirements, the mandatory routing of the funding via the government, and also restrictions on what, in fact, the money can be used for. And then lastly, we have, of course, the stigmatization of foreign funding through the labeling of their recipients as foreign agents. Often these laws are vague and allow governments to disrupt or block the registration, operation, or funding of groups, largely on grounds of national security, economic interest, sovereignty, and sometimes morals and values. Those restrictive laws have generally been targeted at advocates who undertake advocacy, litigation, and mobilization to hold government to account. those who scrutinize public policy, especially with respect to counterterrorism, those who challenge the economic interests of states and corporations, and also those who work on contested, marginalized issues, especially LGBTI and women's rights, and to some extent migrants' rights too. I have no clear answer as to why this space is closing and why all these restrictions are coming into place. I can say that there has been, I think, despite your best efforts, a global loss of democratic momentum, and certainly from the 1990s and early 2000, there has been very much, I think, an increasing disenchantment with even the notion of human rights. There is the rise of power of political systems, especially they can be theocratic or nationalist, largely opposed to universal values. There is the rise of populism and the disdain for those who work for the other or for minorities. And I think a genuine fear by those in power to be held to account. I think it's a great tribute to the power of civil society that many of those who are abusing their positions now fear it and therefore wish to quash it. So how should we respond? There are a number of things which I think, certainly as a donor, but you as legislators should be guided by a number of fundamental principles. As a threshold question, I think it's true to say that the long-term health of all societies depends on the ability of individuals to come together to challenge the abuse of power, share ideas, promote social cohesion, and advance shared interests for mutual benefit. And in order to realize the full value of civic participation, it's really essential that there is freedom of association, peaceful assembly, and freedom of expression. So, in terms of being an international donor, we are often asked by governments why we do what we do. I have to say that we are completely unapologetic about funding groups in countries all over the world, and we fund from countries as varied as the United States, to Russia, to Brazil, to India, to a whole range of countries. And why we do that is because we believe in the right to participate. And it is true that some of the organizations we work on behalf of minority and vulnerable groups that have been marginalized from public discourse. It means for them taking positions that are unpopular for a significant portion of the public. And sometimes it even extends to brave acts of confrontation to challenge existing power structures in the form of investigative journalism, public protest, and strategic litigation. The right to participation is not easily won and is frequently contested, but that's the part of democracy. The second guiding principle is that we believe that civil society has the right to access resources. Effective participation requires money and other resources. I don't dispute that governments have a legitimate interest in regulating the flow of resources, but I can see no rationale to distinguish between access to resources by business to pursue profit and access to those who participate in the public sphere. I want to be clear that we provide support not because of any right of our own, but because those engaged in activism in their own communities have the right to seek resources. And then lastly, we believe in the right to freedom of association, assembly, and expression. These are essential preconditions for a vibrant civil society. And while appropriate regulation is necessary, the protection of these rights must guide the design and implementation of the relevant legal frameworks. I would really urge you in your parliaments to ensure that these regulations do not become so onerous that the energies and resources of civil society is overwhelmed with simple compliance issues. Things should not be more difficult for civil society than for other sectors of the economy regulated by the government, including business. And regulations, above all, should not be aimed at limiting the effectiveness of groups based solely on their policy agenda. So as a private philanthropy, I just would reiterate that we are committed to supporting civil society in countries around the world to ensure solidarity and resilience, and I hope that in your role as legislators, you will do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Adrian Arena. And I think your intervention was very important about the inclusive society and our responsibilities as legislators to fulfill the commitments of the society. So thanks again. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Leonard Ramatlakane, a Member of Parliament in South Africa and also a member of PDA. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Ladies and gentlemen, my topic, I have prepared slides for you because in the next 10 minutes, I will not have time to finish everything, so I will rush through and you will have opportunity to read through as I go through. The first point on the first slide is just to set a context, and I'm not going to go much onto that because that's all the subject has already been discussed in various forums. And the second slide, I'm just going to summarize it to say to you that as a country, we were faced with the extremist fundamentalists after the post-apartheid. This group came out of the small minority group in society, and of course they exploited during the transition period the grievances of the people and claiming this easy solution through using the means of violence. They call themselves people against drugs and gangsterism, and the grievances here, they were aiming to deal with at the time, the drugs, gangsterism, and they were saying we can solve this problem. Cape Town as a country, as a town, as a mother city, is known of having a high level of drugs, gangsterism, with a number of it, but they were focusing in terms of mobilizing community to say, we will solve the problem for you, therefore support us. Of course, they were earlier religious fundamentalists. They were not necessarily extremists as it began. But as it moved forward, it started changing its character. And of course, it became clear that what they were doing, they were now extremists. They were basically assassinating, extorting money out of business people. Of course, anybody that was speaking against the actions were obviously their houses were bombed, politicians were threatened, magistrates were bombed, houses were bombed, police were attacked, and so on. Obviously, in dealing with this particular question, as a country, we have to do the counter strategy in terms of how do you deal with this phenomenon. That, of course, what seems to be a tolerated grievances has now been hijacked by the extreme movement. Of course, the blunt power did not work. Now, there has been lots of demand from the former President Nelson Mandela at the time that the best solution to this particular problem is to impose the curfew, declare state of emergency, deploy the army to deal with this particular problem. And he's resisted to say, we cannot we must understand the grievances of the people, and having understood the grievances, deal with the grievances. If we were to deploy the army in this particular conflict, then obviously we would have lost the war. We would have lost and those who are anti-transformation would have won the day. And our constitution is resilient enough to deal with this particular challenge. Of course, the strategy was then 5 spaces strategy that makes sure that the effective police resources are deployed in the critical area. On one hand, the strategy is celadon of the police. 5 of these strategies, the first one was dealing with theological space. because they are the extremists, Muslim extremists, and therefore the battle to win it, you have to deal with the space of theological space, winning the battle of the ideas, to make sure that the legitimacy of the Islamic in itself is not necessarily lost. The second one was the social space, acting on the legitimate grievances. The issue that the people are complaining that gangsterism have taken a space because they've seen the gangsterism and drugs, and therefore we have to deal with that. The ANC had to mount a huge resource campaign to deal with this, to say that resource must be deployed to address the grievances. Two, build the anti-coalition marches with sources with the religious groupings in order to deal with this extremists. And three, to make sure that you transform from the opposition into a coalition partner with government, able to understand the strategy. Three was the financial space, making sure that we're cutting the supply line. They're obviously dealing with, as the PAGAD continue, they need more resources to begin to fund their campaign. They're going to court to make sure that they have lawyers, they have all this money, they sustain their family who are incarcerated. Our strategy was to make sure that you narrow the space. You actually close that space of the resource, you cut that, the line of the supply in terms of the strategy, the two-pronged strategy, being the operation side being Operation Saladin, obviously was beginning to bite. The fourth one is being the operating space, ending the impunity as a plan. In this one, between this, in this internegram, PAGAD was beginning to exploit the vacuum by beginning to say their struggle is basically to change the state. They're pronouncing that the state, which is the democratic state, is actually illegitimate. They're beginning to demand the Islamic state, which is their campaign that they're aiming to achieve with their campaign. Obviously, for that, the mobilization of communities, empowerment of civil society, awareness program was the strategy to close the gap between that of what they demanded. The fifthly, which is a legal space, was dealing with the winning around using the rule of law. The policy shift, introduction of the policy, basically making sure that there's a proper act that is enacted to be able to deal with this phenomenon. And the act that was introduced is prevention of organized crime, which define whole lots of activities of organized crime. As we moved into that rule of law and using the legislation began to become more the ally to taming the party activities, making sure that they are incarcerated, the members are incarcerated. Dealing with open court has been a very important aspect to make sure that you win the battle of ideas in terms of the aim of this particular organization. At that time, many of their leaders of PAGAD were incarcerated for many years in jail. Of course, the one part of that was what do you do when they come out? So the rehabilitation program that happened during the incarceration period was also helpful. The last part was the learning the lesson of defeating global extremists. I'm rushing through, is basically to understand that the issue about extreme and terrorism across variety, space and time are just a different of type, but the substance are the same, are basically the same. Of course, to narrowing the space for recruitment while simultaneously dealing with the concern and tackling the root causes of the problem has been the important one. Contradistinction, on one hand, establishing that the Muslim community differs from extremists either by asserting that they do not regard the extremists as represent Islamic by delineating Islamic core values, asserting the abiding value of Islamic, and of course positioning the coexistence missions or share world. The proponent, or let me rush to the last, the way forward in terms of this aspect is that The proverbial hatchet of bond of the emotional for revenge, however subject to such an overall strategy, it has a potential to use a scalpel. Utilizing the scalpel may succeed in prioritizing the defeat of extremists using the sustained pressure to deny them a land, resources, income, vulnerable community, and triumph of that kind. Securing the best intelligence, which is mean the people and the state in terms of participation of the society, ensuring that political transformation, the whole inclusiveness of civil society in the political process becomes important. The whole issue about the legislations as Member of Parliament reviewing and introducing the new legislation as an enabler to deal with this matter. And of course, the accountability of state, demanding the accountability of state in implementing the policy and building the partnership with civil society against the extremist grouping. That has been the key for us. And to end, we'd like to thank you very much for inviting South Africa also to participate in this important conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard Ramatlakane. It was very interesting to take part of your experience from South America. South Africa, I'm so sorry. South Africa. And as your experience as a member of parliament also, the importance of a strategy and an overall view to include a whole society like the social space, financial space, and also to act and operate and include the civil society. I think this was very good for us to take part of. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Ahmed Malouf, Member of Parliament from the Maldivian. Please. And I would also want to say that you are a member of PDA and a spokesperson of the opposition. So please, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is certainly a great privilege to have the opportunity once again to address a meeting of this unique organization. I extend to you all a very hearty greetings from the Republic of Maldives. Assalamu alaikum. For a parliamentarian to be successfully involved in any meaningful process, it is of paramount importance for that member to be safe and free. As I speak here today, many of my colleagues may think that for me to be here, I would have been free and safe. Sadly, that is not the case. I have had many difficult stumbling blocks getting here. I have been in Sri Lanka the past 2 months, during which time the government had cited spurious and dubious charges, including the public announcement of a travel ban and virtually withholding my passport. I was incarcerated in prison for 11 months on trumped-up charges of obstructing the police at a peaceful political rally in Male, in Maldives. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruled that my sentence was unlawful and called for an immediate release. Despite the calls from PGA and IPU to release me immediately, I was freed after the completion of my sentence in June this year. In short, Parliament members, especially the opposition, are openly and actively being pursued and subjected to predatory tactics by partisan elements of the police. They do this to incriminate opposition parliament members and unlawfully declare the loss of their seats. 23 Maldivian MPs are presently being prosecuted through the corrupt judiciary. At this juncture, I would like to thank PGA, President of PGA Margareta, the board members, Secretary General David, and its staff for the tremendous support extended to me and for my colleagues in Maldives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, On 24th July 2017, 45 members of parliament from a house of 85 members duly signed and submitted a motion of no confidence against the Speaker, Honorable Masih, for subverting the parliamentary process. Since then, the parliament has been under military siege. The parliament was padlocked and the MPs were not allowed to enter the premises. We get assaulted inside the chamber by the military. We get pepper sprayed and brutally dragged out from the chamber. MPs in the opposition are now maintaining that decisions enforced while the parliament remains hijacked by the military are illegitimate, and Abdullah Masih is no longer the speaker, and that he is being unlawfully imposed on the Maldivian people by a dictator. Meanwhile, this imposter Abdullah Masih had suspended parliament sittings for long periods by citing unbelievable reasons such as two-fire incident in toilet, which we later found out was a decoy set off by military. Following the no-confidence petition against MP Masih, the government began prosecuting 23 MPs, saying they had obstructed security forces by attempting to enter the parliament premises. In addition to these 23 prosecutions, 10 MPs are unconstitutionally unseated. MP Qasim Ibrahim is jailed for 3 years, while MP Faris Mamoon has been detained for the past 5 months without a trial. Deputy Speaker MP Nazim was jailed for 25 years. In Maldives, all the opposition leaders are jailed or they are forced to live in exile. Former President Nasheed, former Vice President Adib, former Defense Minister Nazim and Tollat, leader of Adalat Party Sheikh Imran, and many of the opposition supporters are jailed or prosecuted. Recently, the Speaker has built a platform and now he sits 10 feet high and he is surrounded by a wall of more than 50 soldiers inside the chamber. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Maldives is currently facing an incremental growth of radicalization. Over time, political violence, clashes between moderate and takfiri ideologies, and government collusion have created conditions of the growth of radical Islam. The few homegrown extremist outfits have received ideological and tactical support from transnational terrorist networks such as Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. The failures in multiple sectors in state governance have led to a situation where ISIS now see Maldives as a potential ground for exerting their supremacy. According to the statistics, Maldives has the second highest per capita of people fighting for ISIS, and our population is only 300,000. An independent blogger, Yamin Rashid, was brutally murdered in April 2017 by assailants who the police said were religious extremists. Another journalist, Ahmad Rilwan, was abducted since 8 August 2014, again by perpetrators who the police claim as unknown religious extremists. With our extremely corrupt and politicized judiciary, it is more alarming that President Yamin had assured in every public speech that he will implement death penalty. Maldives had an unofficial moratorium on death penalty for the past years. A new chamber has been built and it's ready for execution after 62 years. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my special topic today is about the importance of opposition parties to maintain a healthy democracy. With my various observations, my humble intention has been to state here as loud as I can and as many times possible that this is just not the way it should be. The situation of Maldives is not how it should be. The opposition parliamentarians and the opposition political parties should be safe and free to maintain a healthy democracy. Thank you, members of European Parliament. Thank you, members of parliaments from all over the world for the continuous support. We need support. We need more support from you all to restore democracy and human rights in Maldives, for the opposition to be free and safe so that we could maintain a healthy democracy. Before I conclude, let me assure you all and all the Maldivians that I am not ready to give up my fight, even if I have to go back to jail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed Malouf. Your speech was very strong, and it's difficult to understand your experience. But as you said, the international cooperation is very important, that we as parliamentarians, we keep up our high values. But not only we, also the civil society. And therefore, it's so important that there are constitutions in the country, that the constitution is respected, and the resources, like military forces and so on, are not misused and not used against the country's people. And what's happened, as you said, to act like that has happened with your speaker, is a ground for extremism. So it's a double threat for the country. And from PDA, we hold, all of us, the freedoms very, very high, and the rule of law. So thanks for being here and sharing your experience. Thanks. And now I will give the floor to Deputy Armando Amas from Venezuela, who is chair of the subcommittee on human rights and international humanitarian law, as well as vice chair of the Defense and Security Committee of the National Assembly. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor, colleagues of the Parliament, of this PGA. It's my first meeting here in PGA, so I'm a little bit nervous, and English is not my first language. So thank you all. I'm very honored to be in here, my first meeting, and to belong to PGA. I could summarize my exposition saying that it's almost the same like my predecessor Malouf, but 10 times worse, basically. So that would be all of my exposition. Yesterday I was talking to him at dinner, and we were discussing how equal, how similar were our situations. And he told me, no, but your situation is even worse. And I say, oh my God, what difference in the world are portraying the image? Because even though we have, of course, a political crisis, we do have a humanitarian crisis. And those who fight for democracy and freedom nowadays in Venezuela are being pointed as terrorists, as threatened for the Republic, and are being imprisoned. While I am speaking right now, the first vice president of our national parliament had to ask for a political asylum at the embassy of Chile in Venezuela, the Honorable Freddy Guevara, because of threats of the regime. So this is me. From 3 months ago, the parliament was attacked by militant groups of the regime sent by the dictator President Maduro. I'm a survivor of an attempt of murder, and luckily I'm here with you. Also, I've been almost 4 months now out of my country, and of course, again, and like in Maldives, they take us away our passports in order for us not to travel, especially the ones that we denounce the regime abroad. And this has happened for many other parliamentarians. I'm not going to let a lot of time here, but this all started in 1998, when Hugo Chavez arose into power with an authoritarian project. Even though he was a charismatic leader, after almost 20 years, the results of this revolutionary project has been ended up in a huge, dramatic humanitarian crisis because of the lack of medicines and the lack of food. These are the World bank governance indicators, and you can see the decline of all of the major indicators dealing with the rule of law, transparency, accountability, and freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. Yet, this is a cause of how democracy, which is not a perfect but a perfectible system, can be declined and can be threatened from within. We did have democracy for almost, or for 40 years, an imperfect one, democracy, but always perfectible. So the mistakes and the lack of responsibility in our political elite led us to this tragic event, which has enduring for almost 20 years. So we're coming here to speak about atrocities, right? And it's a cruel act, of course, involving physical violence or injury. But when we define mass atrocities, how do we quantify what mass is? By hundreds? By thousands? By millions? Indeed, we have to say that in our history, we've learned that because of authoritarian rules, which in words of our colleague Tucapel Jimenez from yesterday, he said, dictators are the worst violent extremists, because they hold the whole state, the state power in their hands. So this is the major threat, and this is what is happening in the Philippines, as our colleague related us, in Maldives, in Venezuela, and so other countries. And the international community has not been efficient enough to stop these threats. We can do more, and we should do more as international communities, as international community. This is the majority of our parliament, which is now impeded of doing their acts. The regime has co-opted all the institutions of the states, yet not the parliament, yet they have the judiciary, the electoral system, the executive branch, and the military. So what they have done is to have a parallel type of parliament elected a few months ago in a totally fraudulent process, and they are taking away our competencies. One of the laws that has passed, as Adrian Arena said, that restrict the participation and especially the donations of public sphere, it's called Ley de Defensa de la Soberanía Política y Autodeterminación Nacional. It's Law of the Defense of the Sovereignty and National Autodetermination. And one of the basically what this law says is that you cannot finance human rights or democracy promoting type of projects if you don't have permission of the regime, and if you defy what they consider is Republican values or democracy or so on and so forth, you can go into jail, and the international donors or international community can be expelled out of the country because of promoting these values. Also, this parallel parliament called and fraudulent parallel parliament called Asamblea Nacional Constituyente, they enacted a law against hatred. It's just an Orwellian expression, like Ministry of Happiness that we do have, unfortunately, in Venezuela. What this constitutional law, they just passed it 10 days ago, enacted, is the possibility for a people perhaps walking down the streets and a military or police man asks for his cell phone and it has something dealing with democratic values or something against the government, even though if it's not his or that person, if it is somebody sent a message, but if he has it in the phone, it can be in prison for 6 years or something. So this is the type of regime that we have in Venezuela. And of course, the violence, we have the 5 cities most violent among the 5th cities most violent in the hemisphere, and among 7 among the 15 most violent for 100,000 inhabitants. The humanitarian crisis, according to Caritas, the foundation of the foundation that articulates the Catholic Church charities, they say that over 300,000 children are in risk of dying for malnutrition in Venezuela nowadays. Over 300,000 children are in risk of dying of malnutrition. So this is a potential genocide. I've called it in our parliament a silent genocide. Is this different from people or entire communities being killed by machine guns? We protested in Venezuela this year for over 4 months, and 152 people were killed. In 2014, almost 50 people got killed because of protest against the government, against the regime. But again, as Maluf, we are decided, we are very motivated, and we are truly defending democratic values. And the question is nowadays for international community to permit or to prevent. And I'm sure that we can do more in order to prevent. And here are 3 things to conclude as a conclusion. First thing, to prevent, to be aware of what is happening. Second thing, I think we should promote a system of prompt response within the international community in order to prevent this type of atrocities. A system within parliaments or governments to prompt response in order to have a very strong response against this. We can make alliances with NGOs and alliances with organizations like perhaps like football or sports organizations. We can have a program of incentives of perhaps child soldiers to send to give away their weapons, and so you can give them footballs and insert them into tournaments and give financial incentives in order to be in the sports system rather than in the violent systems. This is good for culture as well, as our colleague Lia Quartepelle said yesterday, that with culture, we do have an organization, an allied organization called Sin Mordaza with our threats in Venezuela. This organization was being threatened by the regime because they use art in order to protest, in order to raise awareness. And finally, to have some sort of platform like petition.org and make an alliance within PGA, or maybe PGA could have a platform for all of us to sign very prompt, very rapid petitions through our web platform, and also to know and to enact conventions like the Palermo Conventions against organized crime. What we have in Venezuela nowadays is an organized crime co-opted, not the government, not just the executive branch, but the whole state apparatus. And this is a threat not just to our hemisphere. I think this is a global threat because they do have links with international terrorists, with international money laundering, with all the criminal networks. And I think we should, and we could, and we have to do more in order to raise awareness and to counteract this type of regimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Armando Amas. It was very valuable to take part of your experience from Venezuela. Most of us have read about the situation in Venezuela. And that's one thing. It's another thing to take part of your experience. And democracy is never something we as politicians, as citizens, could take for given. We do always have to fight for it. And I think your comments that there need to be a system, there need to be a constitution. But of course, there need also to be a system to scrutinize, to make those who are responsible, to take their responsibility, to be in charge. And to listen what happened, for example, with the civilians, the 300,000 children who are suffering from malnutrition. It shows also that the most vulnerable are those who are the citizens, the smallest. And it shows the importance of a free society. And I hope that next time when you meet with Mr. Ahmed Malov, you shouldn't say whose experience is worst, whose experience is the best, and how did you go? What did you do to reach it? Thank you very much. Thank you. And now we have some time left, and I must say thank you to the panel. Because now I open the floor for questions, remarks, comments. And first on the list is, I give the floor to Jennifer McCarthy, because Jennifer McCarthy have written the names, and I am not too good to read them. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Margareta. The first speaker will be Mr. Siegfried Brack, Speaker of Parliament of Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, allow me to make a few remarks on the role of parliaments, because that's the chapter we're dealing with this morning. The role of parliaments, notably in terms of the fight against terrorism and against extremism, because we in Belgium, we have had a similar evolution as in many other countries. We gave more power to police and intelligence services, but of course that's the one side of the medal. The other side of the medal is staying in a democracy, respecting human rights. And we even, talking again about the one side of the medal, we even made in our parliament an extra committee for legislation on anti-terrorist and anti-extremism laws. But we also have reinforced the democratic control on police and intelligence services. I must say, this democratic control in my country exists for more than 20 years. We work with what we call a so-called Parliamentary Oversight Committee on a committee of magistrates. On the one side, we call it Committee P, which is a committee controlling police force. The other side, Committee I, which is controlling the intelligence service, and we control these two committees. You see, it is a system of checks and balances. What do we control? First of all, we control the efficiency of the services, because that's of course very important. They have to make priorities in what they do or what they don't do, first of all. Secondly, and that's the main point I think within this meeting, we control the respect that the police services and the intelligence services pay on constitutional rights, which is very, very important that you have that democratic control, because I think it enforces or reinforces the legitimacy of police services and intelligence services. And I'd like to, I'm not going to be very long, Madam Chair, I'd like to make an appeal via PGA to create, in fact, a sort of multilateral convention on that item, which is the democratic control on police and intelligence services. The reason is, in fact, very simple. Since terrorism is international, and since the fight on terrorism is international, we have to collaborate. We have to share information. Otherwise, we can't do anything about it. And that's what we learned, unfortunately. But since terrorism is international, fight against terrorism is international, I think democratic control, how difficult it might be, should be one way or another internationalized. And perhaps PGA should think about how to organize in a sort of international convention a shared control on police and intelligence services in all our respective countries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brake. Your remarks is noted, and we will continue the discussion. Now I give the floor to Jennifer.
Thank you. The next speaker is Dr. Bariwan Kailani, Member of Parliament from Iraq.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Honorable Chairwoman. Thank you for the panelists. Actually, because this panel is very, very important, as we are all parliamentarians. So our role of parliamentarian to defend violence and mass atrocities, I have a recommendation. I have one recommendation to make, and I hope it would be taken into consideration by PGA committee, which I think it is very important as a role of parliamentarian in defending people from violence, extremisms, and mass atrocities. I propose setting up a permanent committee for education and the PGA, among the PGA, to be called Education Subcommittee of the PGA. So the members will be members of PGAs who are working on education. The purpose of this, this subcommittee is going to be first to combat terrorism intellectually and academically through updating the curricula in the education sector to teach students in university level how to protect themselves from extremism, thoughts, and ideology. Second, rehabilitation of the victims intellectually and scientifically, and encourage them to complete their studies and reintegrate them into society and to clear the mind for the negative effects left in them. Providing the needs of students and youth in schools and universities in areas and cities that were subject to terrorist organization. Of course, one of the most important things is providing courses and scholarships for those people who've been victims of those organizations. Fifth, conducting periodic or semi-annual meeting to discuss and follow up the decisions and recommendation of this committee. The most important thing as well is the media campaigns and educational propaganda in cooperation with all sorts of media through colleges of media communications and journalisms in order to communicate the mission of the committee, and it is its objective in the widest form through the visual, audio media, and written statements. Of course, we need to be very, today, to come up with good decisions for our new strategy for this matter. I'm confident that the setting up of the committee will play a major role in the implementation of the decisions and recommendations of this important and qualitative forum, which comes up at a sensitive and dangerous time for most of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa, especially that Iraq is now close to liberating all its territory from terrorism, and we must prevent its return and fortify and protect this country from the return of terrorism and eradication its roots and extremist ideas that are contrary to the teaching of Islam, religion, and its human values. Finally, I suggest that the chairmanship of the committee be Iraq, as this country is most affected by terrorism, and it's almost getting ready to rehabilitate their own people through parliamentarian all over the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kailani, for your intervention. And now we go further on the speakers list.
Thank you. The next speaker is Honorable Millie Odhiambo, Member of Parliament from Kenya.
Thank you. I want to thank the chair and the panelists. I want to thank especially the Oak Foundation, the member from Venezuela and Philippines. I think the issues that they have raised, when you're listening to them in the House, people are horrified because of the nature of the issues that they are saying that are happening in the countries. And I want to say that we empathize with you and we hope that things will get better. But I want to say that when you're talking about shrinking civic or democratic space, it's nothing that happens suddenly. It doesn't happen overnight. I don't think there's any country that wakes up and you're told, suddenly you don't have these rights, you don't have these rights. It always happens with one act, and the next, and the next. My disappointment is the way we are quiet as international community, and we wait until we have a Rohingya type of situation, or what we are talking about in Philippines, then suddenly our conscience hits us. But we're not shocked when one member of parliament is stopped from exercising their mandate as a member of parliament. We are not shocked when a member of parliament, or the scenes that we see, I won't mention countries, but we see countries where parliament becomes boxing matches. That doesn't shock our conscience. We want to wait and see that people have moved in thousands, then our conscience is shocked. And I want to challenge us, especially the international community. I know that there is increasingly changing international policy. A lot of countries are beginning to be more protectionist of their own countries. They are more inward looking, and they don't care. The big brother role has suddenly disappeared. Nobody cares about what goes on with their neighbor. And nobody cares if I am attacked as an individual. It's okay, we can justify it. But it is in small acts that big acts are born. And until we reach a point that we condemn small acts as much as we condemn the big ones, we are headed in the wrong path as an international community. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Odhiambo. And Jennifer, please.
The next speaker is Honorable Shamsul Iskander, Member of Parliament from Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity given to me to do this intervention. Well, we certainly very touched with the testimony of both MPs from Maldives and Venezuela. and assume these cruel actions also happen in other countries where authoritarian leader rules and destroy the rule of law. For instance, my party leader in Malaysia, Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, is currently in jail for the trump up charges level against him. Well, to add fuel to this injustice, we witness laws on the pretext of counter-terrorism, national security, etc., being passed to crush political opposition. Take, for instance, in Malaysia last year, the government made a bold move to legislate and pass the new law under the name of National Security Council Act, which gives sweeping powers to a council headed by the Prime Minister to declare regions, or including the entire country, as security areas to protect any interest in Malaysia. Sounds familiar. The law suspends many restraints on police powers in those areas, allowing the authorities to conduct arrests, searches, and seizures without warrants. Well, I think in this important session, we need to address the important question on striking the right balance between the national security and personal freedom, and how civil society organization plays an effective role on this. I suggest we can embark on aggressive capacity building, especially to the members of parliament, from both divide, to have a better understanding. What is the minimum international standard to balance between the security and also personal freedom? Secondly, I also think we must have a grand strategy with respect to counter the rise of violent extremism. Let us consider marginalization as a grand strategic response to counter the rise of violence and terrorism. I think before we craft a strategy, articulate a policy, pass the law, conduct an operation, launching a community-based program, we should ask ourselves, will this effort help the majority community in question, for which the terrorists presume to speak, further marginalize violent extremism in that community? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Iskander. Now, I would like to announce that there are 7 delegates on the list. Now it's 8, and we have 33 minutes until it should be lunchtime. So I would kindly ask if the intervention would be no longer than 4 minutes for each of you, if it's possible. It would be very, very kind. And Jennifer, please.
Thank you. The next speaker is Senator Wade Mark from Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, may I join in supporting my colleague from Kenya, who spoke a short while ago. I want to say that just as how we are proposing preventive measures to address the rise of terrorism by educating our young population, it seems to me that we also at the PGA level have to embark on a program of preventive measures to safeguard democracies from potential dictatorships. And I say this from the perspective that freedom is never snatched away in one fell swoop. It is removed by small degrees. Streams become rivers, rivers become seas, and seas become oceans. I want to remind my colleagues of the famous Pastor Naimola, that priest from Hitler Germany, when he asked for help and no one came to his rescue. And when he turned around, there was no one left. We have to take action before. Madam Chair, I would like to propose that the PGA, maybe in conjunction with other interparliamentary organizations, whether it's the IPU or the CPA or other organizations, where democracy is being threatened and opposition forces are being undermined and the rule of law is being subverted. And we see these things happening before they actually take full form and manifestation, that action should be taken to at least nip these developments before they ultimately take deep roots. And we are getting examples of what is happening in many countries today. So I think it's a matter of very grave importance that we look at what can be done by the PGA, right, in terms of the rule of law, human rights, and ensuring the continued democracies that we have in our respective countries. And my colleague, Adrian, I would like to ask Adrian, what steps or measures can be taken, as far as you are concerned, by the PGA to assist in removing these restrictions that have been placed on NGOs and civil society organizations in seeking to promote the democratic culture through effective people's participation? Those are my two concerns, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Mark. I put all the questions to the end because there might be more questions. And now, Jennifer, please.
Thank you. The next speaker is PGA board member Ana Kula Segaran, Member of Parliament from Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to salute both the MPs from Argentina and Maldives. My very good friend, Venezuela. I don't know why I always think about Argentina. Both of you have to stay strong and keep the fight going. I'm sure PGA and many other organizations will be with you. But I'm concerned by what Honorable Ahmad Malouf has said, that things are deteriorating to the extent in Maldives where terrorism, the action or non-action of the government is leading to that. I share your sentiment because I know from my country, the counter-terrorism agency had deported 5 Maldives residents from Malaysia to Maldives. Unfortunately, I'm given to understand from certain quarters that when they reached the shore of Maldives, they were released free. They were not prosecuted, or neither were they detained by the Maldives authorities. It's a further action to show that the Maldives government, to show up support, need these kind of people, these extreme people, notwithstanding the Malaysian government in anticipation of bilateral cooperation with Maldives, have deported them to Maldives for appropriate action. And I think maybe organizations around the world, including PGA, can take note of this. Because in a country where we are trying to put out terrorism, and we send those nationals back to their country, and they are released free, it doesn't make sense. Something has to be done about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Segaran. Jennifer, please.
The next speaker is Honorable Antonio Niquise, Member of Parliament from Mozambique.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of the issues I wanted to address has been already covered, but I would like to second and support the proposal made by our fellow MP from Iraq. In fact, Madam Chair, this topic is very important and critical for us as parliamentarians, since our rules entails representing the people, what brings the issue of accountability with our constituencies and, of course, the voters, and also our role as legislators in lawmaking, policymaking, and the rule of oversight. So we really need to come out with a very specific and effective strategy to work with civil society organizations on preventing violence, extremism, and mass atrocities, and defend the fundamental human rights, which includes the freedom of expression and assembly. So I do consider that a sort of holistic approach and cooperation between Parliament and civil society at the local level, national, regional, and global level is key, and the PGA should be leading this process at the global level. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Nikwis. And now I give the floor to Jennifer, please.
I call on Honorable Jesse Majome, Member of Parliament from Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, and especially to our panelists, some of who gave us very heart-rending accounts of the persecution that you as members of Parliament are experiencing in simply trying to do your mandate of representing your peoples. So my question is in that vein. What is it that you think that fellow members of Parliament and maybe fellow members of Parliament, particularly even in the PGA family, if I can call it that, can do in order to also support and strengthen your efforts, particularly in those places where there is, there is that kind of stress and crisis. And if I may also even maybe just ask from South Africa, I noticed that the South African example seemed to me to also show that there's, in terms of what the panelists, the experts were saying about the factors that are likely to cause, that are likely to encourage extremism and also mass atrocities, the weakness of states and sometimes in state responses and breakdowns. And in South Africa, there seems to have been that maybe political will and maybe institutions in place to actually go to plug the the holes where it was coming out. And what is it that we can do to strengthen like maybe state institutions and processes in order to get that kind of response that can actually put a plug on extremism? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mayom. And next, Jennifer.
The next speaker is Honorable Amina Melenin, Deputy Speaker of Morocco.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie les panélistes. Puisqu'on parle des rôles des parlements, je voulais vous parler de l'importance du travail que le Conseil des droits de l'homme à Genève joue. Vous savez très bien que nos pays membres dans ce Conseil-là, ils sont obligés d'exposer leur examen périodique universel devant ce Conseil. Le problème est qu'il n'y a pas une institutionnalisation des rôles des parlements nationaux au sein de ce Conseil. Et vous savez très bien que les résolutions et les recommandations de ce Conseil exercent une impression sur les États et les gouvernements. Le problème est que nous, en tant que parlementaires, on n'a pas un rôle institutionnalisé à jouer au sein de ce Conseil. Il y a les gouvernements qui exposent leurs rapports nationaux. Il y a les ONG qui ont le statut ECOSOC, qui ont des parties prenantes pour faire le débat, les résolutions et les recommandations. Il y a les INDH, les institutions des droits de l'homme. Nous, en tant que parlementaires, on est inclus par l'ONU comme si on fait partie du gouvernement. Or, les rôles sont différents puisqu'on est des pouvoirs tout à fait indépendants. Prenons en considération qu'au sein des parlements, il y a aussi les oppositions. Il n'y a pas juste les majoritaires qui soutiennent leur gouvernement. Alors, je propose comme résolution, recommandation, de faire une action vers l'institutionnalisation de la relation ou bien la contribution des parlements nationaux au sein du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Il y avait déjà une déclaration, il y a une action, une dynamique vers ce sens-là. Je pense qu'on va, si on adopte nous aussi une recommandation pareille, il sera bénéfique, surtout que le Conseil des droits de l'homme joue un grand rôle pour la promotion des droits de l'homme dans nos pays. Merci.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, Honourable Melanini.
Oui. Député Assiata Touré Diallo, Mali.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Et toutes mes félicitations et mes remerciements aux différents panélistes pour leurs exposés de ce matin. Par rapport à la défense des droits de l'homme et au rôle des parlementaires, au Mali, vu le contexte que nous avons avec l'extrémisme violent que nous vivons actuellement depuis, disons, 2012, nous avons pris l'initiative de créer un réseau de parlementaires pour la défense des droits de l'homme. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il est plus qu'important pour nous, fondamental, d'avoir un réseau qui puisse faire la part des choses, délimiter les responsabilités aux différents niveaux. En plus de ce réseau, comme M. Arena vient d'en parler, pour les activistes et l'opposition, la société civile, chacun doit savoir quel est son rôle. Si les activistes, dans l'exercice de leur travail, quand ils font les mouvements, quand ça tourne au vandalisme, cela peut être dommageable. Comment canaliser, comment fixer des cadres pour ces activistes? Ça, c'est la première question. La deuxième question, lorsque les activistes se regroupent avec l'opposition pour mener des activités ensemble au niveau du pays, je ne sais pas quel peut être l'impact de ces deux entités ensemble, parce que normalement, elles sont supposées ne pas aller ensemble, ces deux groupements à part. Mais si, parce que dans nos pays, malheureusement, c'est ce à quoi on assiste. On a les activistes qui se retrouvent avec l'opposition et qui mènent des mouvements ensemble. Et en général, ça finit toujours par des vandalismes. Je prends l'exemple concret du Burkina Faso où, pour des mouvements de l'opposition, ils sont allés jusqu'à brûler l'Assemblée nationale, où il y a eu des morts. Comment on peut faire une compartimentation de ces différentes activités-là? En termes de responsabilité, vous avez parlé de responsabilité, c'est vrai. Les parlementaires ont des rôles à jouer, ils ont des responsabilités, des comptes à rendre. Mais comment, dans ce cas-là, précisément, on peut situer les responsabilités? Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Deputy Touré Diallo. And next, Jennifer.
I call on Honourable Albana Vokshi, Member of Parliament from Albania.
Thank you. I'm the chair of the PGA National Group from Albania. I became a member like a year ago, and this is my very first time to attend a meeting of PGA. So thanks for giving me this possibility, and please do count on Albanian group to have a more active role if we can. Secondly, I would like to thank the Italian authorities for hosting this activity, but furthermore for supporting and helping Albanians, which after the fall of the communism in 1990 and 1991, there were hundreds, thousands of Albanians using every kind of roads, navy, full of people that came in Italy, and the Italian authorities and Italian families, they opened the doors. So thank you very much for all you have done, and I'm very happy that the Albanian communities and the Albanian immigrants are among those that most of them have been fully integrated in the Italian society. And also I find this event very interesting. This is a kind of place where we can hear and listen and understand what's going on, what really goes on in different countries, that by different means, by media or other means, maybe we never can understand what's going on. It's important to know and to share experiences. Unfortunately, some of the experiences we heard today and even yesterday are very sad, like Venezuelan or Maldives case. We did experience this kind of things during the communist regime, and Verhoja was kind of very similar to Chavez, and now Maduro, even though Maduro, no one understands how can he go so long with the level of intelligence and education that he has, but that's a pity for Venezuela, such a rich country. Albania right now is not a risk for having terrorist ties. There are some fighters that went to some people from Albania that went to fight with ISIS, but some of the organizers, they have been condemned and they are in jail right now, even though during when they were going to court, there were other people that were surrounding the court. So it was very, very difficult for the judges and prosecutors really to take place in those hearings or in all the phases of the court, but at the end they are condemned and many years, like 17, 15 years in prison. But the risk now in Albania is that Albania is among the countries where the cultivation of drug is being raised recently. And the risk is that having dirty money, having money laundering in place, and having Albania back in the road of cultivation and in the road of export of drugs, it might be a danger for terrorist links as well. So the Albanian authorities should keep in mind, and of course the PGA should keep in mind that that might be a danger, but so far we have also approved the national Albanian strategy to counter the terrorism. We are part of NATO, so far we are okay. Coming back to Venezuela, actually I know I know what's going on there. My brother lives there, my sister lives there, they have their own families there. I know that they cannot find even bread to eat, no olive oil, no medicine, so it's really a pity. But my question is, and what my colleagues also raised before, what do you really think we as a PGA or as members of different parliaments can do to help? Because international community in Venezuela is not strong, civil society is not strong, the opposition has the majority of the parliament but cannot do anything because the court is being controlled by Maduro.
Thank you very much. Please be short, because there is 2 more on the list and there need to be remarks from the panel also,
yes,
please.
That's my question. So what really we can do to help?
Thank you very much, Honorable Roxy. There are 2 more on the list, so I kindly ask you to be very brief so there will be time for the panel for their remarks. Thank you very much. And Jennifer.
The next speaker is former Vice President of Malawi, Honorable Kumbo Hastings Kachali, Member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. Not much. I'll start with what our sister in the morning was saying. What would happen if this country had women as leaders? In Malawi, what we've done, we've passed a legislature that on any position now onwards, it will be 60%, 40%. either 60% men, 40% women, either 60% women, 40% men. Why we are doing this is to encourage the participation of women at all levels. We are doing this because, you know, the patriarchal system has a lot of disadvantages for women. And we thought that's the drive that we would take. And for your information, we have ever had a president as a head of state, a woman. She ruled us for a good 2.5 years. Now to the second issue, our colleagues from Venezuela and Maldives, I sympathize with you. All of us here, tomorrow we'll be jumping in a plane, going to see our families and our constituents. And I'm told you are not because of the circumstances. It's unfortunate. I don't know what you said. My sister from Zimbabwe and from that side mentioned what is it that we can do. I want to ask this House, can we draw a roadmap so that we don't just listen, but we must learn to act to help our friends? Lastly, I want to thank South Africa for the steps you are taking. Continue, because that breeds corruption, and corruption breeds the gap between the haves and the have-not. Lastly, NGOs, please help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kachali. Now there are 2 more on the list. I do kindly want to remember all of you that there are more panels in the afternoon where it also will be possibility to make remarks. And I also kindly ask you to be very brief so the panel can make their comments. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Honorable Abdul Matan Kazru, Member of Parliament from Bangladesh.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for giving this unique opportunity to speak for yours. Madam Speaker, I have come from Bangladesh with a bleeding heart. You might all have heard about the Rohingya refugees. Hundreds and thousands of people, Rohingya Myanmar citizens, have taken refuge to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is already an overpopulated country of 160 million people in 54,000 square miles. Now, about 1 million people have already taken shelter. Now more are coming. Now we have already signed a memorandum with the Myanmar government to take back the Rohingyas. But I would request, make a more humble submission to the PGA authority to see for yourself, to send a team to see how these Rohingya people are being rehabilitated. You will be astonished to hear the Myanmar army have destroyed all the infrastructures, their houses. If they go back to Myanmar, they will not be able to identify their houses. So there should be a team from PGA to oversee and monitor how these people are rehabilitated. I have gone to Rohingya and in Cox's Bazar, seen hundreds and thousands of children, babies and women and children are the most vulnerable. So how they will be, they don't know their father, they don't know whereabouts of their parents. Only the mother, the women and children are coming. So I would request you to send a team to see for yourself how these people are rehabilitated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Kashu. And Jennifer, please.
The final speaker is Ms. Julie Ward from UK, Member of the European Parliament.
Okay. All right, thank you. I will try and be brief. This is my first annual assembly. I'm very committed to the work of PGA. I think it's a hugely significant vehicle for those of us who want to maintain and develop connections with civil society and build trust in elected parliamentarians and other elected members. I would like to draw people's attention to a report that I authored. I'd like to draw people's attention to a report that I authored in the European Parliament for the Education and Culture Committee. It was the Parliament's response to the Paris Declaration, which was all education ministers from 28 different member states coming together after the Charlie Hebdo murders and the Danish attacks to say that education has to be the best response really to violent extremism. You know, the knee-jerk response of many states is let's have more guns, let's have more police, let's have more surveillance, let's have more laws, let's shut down society. And actually that doesn't solve the problem. So education is absolutely the key. I'll tweet a link to it later. I'd like you to look at it and to use it as a policy framework in your own countries. I think what else can we do? And this was not a legislative proposal because we have education as a member state competence, but it's very important when we do this kind of work in the European Parliament where we engage with civil society and stakeholders that member states and other countries are listening to what we're saying.
Please be very brave, because we are soon ending and it's the time
I will,
of
but
the
I
lunch.
have waited 2 days to do this, and I actually gave my name 3 times, okay? So I think it's important I had the floor now. I also wanted to raise awareness of the Eli Wiesel Network, which I co-founded, which is a network for parliamentarians to raise awareness of genocide and genocide denial, which organizes study visits with parliamentarians, young people, civil society organizations to countries where atrocities have happened or are in danger of happening. And again, you can find out about that through me. And in your parliaments, are you having Commons assemblies? We had a Commons assembly in the European Parliament. It was absolutely packed. Parliamentarians were sitting on the floor because the room was absolutely full of civil society organizations. And I think young people can be part of this. Young people from a really, really early age. It's not just about people in universities. I volunteer at a summer school about participation and democracy every summer. And this summer school involves children from the age of 3 years old, and it involves young people with learning disabilities. So democracy is for everybody. It's not just for us. And I have one little question for...
Of course, now we're running out of time.
One little question, which is about organizations that set themselves up as NGO monitors, because we now have organizations. There is a specific organization called NGO Monitor, which has been attacking me personally because I exposed some links between somebody who was going for a high position and links with extremist far-right groups. And I think that we have to be very careful when people set themselves up to monitor NGOs. What are they really doing behind this shelter? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ward, Member of the European Parliament. And I am sorry, I close the list right now, and I give the floor to the panelists for a short comments. The floor is yours from the wall and then over here. Thank you very much.
Yes, I want to thank all for your support. I produced with several other colleagues in the parliament this report called Venezuelan Parliament is a Parliament in Resistance. We're going to translate this report and send it to the directory of the PGA so it can be shared with you. But according to a strategy, their colleague told us, what can we do when we leave to our countries? It comes up to my mind, I think, through the PGA, we can articulate a day for a parliamentarian declaration in each of our own parliaments in support, one day for the Maldives, one day for the Philippines, one day for some other country, and especially one day from Venezuela as well. And we can articulate that within the PGA. Just imagine in one day, many parliaments in the world pass the same resolution, the same parliamentarian declaration in favor of democracy and freedom in these countries. I think that would be very powerful, especially in global media. And my second proposition is that the PGA could make some sort of small information type of videos, like animated videos, especially for children in the school, so we can start a school campaign within the PGA, that the PGA can be the main promoter in the schools, and we can project these videos of how democracy is important and how it can be threatened from within. And this could be a campaign for the PGA within the schools in all these countries. And in different languages, we are going to be sending the same message articulated by the PGA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Amas. And now I give the floor to Honorable Ramatlakane, please.
Thank you very much. Briefly, the question about sort of the Zimbabwean question, three things that I think I want to emphasize. Every democracy, if it's weak, you are going to face lots of challenges. So what you need a state that is strong, you need a civil society that is strong, you need institutions that support democracy that is strong, you need to keep accountability, the leadership accountable to the people of the country. And of course, you need a civil society that is educated, that is aware, so that is able to continue to insert pressure and expose what is wrong in terms of government, what government practice is happening. Because every little thing that happens brews something, and that can lead into corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Ramatlakane. And now I give the floor to Honorable Malouf.
Thank you very much. The Commonwealth sent a fact-finding mission to Maldives, and after this report, Maldives decided to leave Commonwealth. No, like from the European Parliament, they have passed 3 resolutions calling for travel bans and targeted sanctions. They don't care about it, but still, it helps. Like for us, it's a support. Like when I was in jail, I had a radio. So when I heard a very strong statement from PGA, it gave me strength. I had more courage to be there, you know, to keep on fighting. Something like, let's say, when our speaker, you know, the pretender, he travels to the international parliamentary meetings. I want one of you to tell him that you are a pretender. You know, you should stop doing this against the speaker. That's more than enough for us. So there's nothing much actually I see like from a statement that would make a difference in Maldives. But at least if we know, if the Maldivians know that you are looking after what's happening in Maldives, that you are monitoring the situation, we would be more than happy, and it will help when we go for an election. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Honorable Malouf. And now I give the floor to Mr. Arena, please.
Very quickly, I just make a plea to you, essentially as regulators of civil society, as those who in fact pass the laws which constrain and permit their operation. I just would ask you to, in your public statements, to affirm the legitimacy of civil society and not buy into their demonization by the other side. And then secondly, in the event that you are asked to examine the laws affecting the operation of those organizations, that you have in mind the right to association, expression, that you have the right to participate, and you have the right to access resources, all as your guiding principles in examining the legality and proportionality of the law that you're being considered to vote on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arena, and I think we give the panel applaud. And I do also want to thank all participants for your contribution.